Welcome back to the Sentinel Report. Alex Newman, your host here. Folks, there have been some really interesting discoveries in recent months on asteroids that bring up some really significant questions about how the Earth got to looking like it does. Now, I'm sure most of you learned in your government indoctrination public schools, and I learned when I was in school, not in government school, but still an indoctrination camp, that there was plate tectonics, whatever. And I had no reason to doubt that. But I was at a conference, a homeschool conference, just a few months ago. I gave the keynote talk there on some things, and I ran into a very interesting individual who said, no, plate tectonics is not really what happened. And he introduced me to this thing called the hydroplate theory. And it was so fascinating. I watched a few videos about it, and I don't know enough to know whether it's correct or not, but I know enough to know that this ought to be heard. In fact, this, to me at least, makes just as much sense, if not more, as the plate tectonics theory, and it seems to be pretty in line with the evidence and with what the Bible teaches. Our guest today to discuss all this is Brian Lauer. He's a biblical creation researcher. He's given talks on creation and freedom talks from Minnesota to Florida at churches, schools, colleges, conferences. You can find some of those talks on the Solidify Your Faith YouTube channel, and then the ones that would otherwise be censored are over at Revival of Truth channel on Rumble. Brian, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And it's such a pleasure. And I appreciate the microphone to get all these different ideas out there. So great job. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you trying to sound the alarm about this. I think a lot of Christians just say, well, that's secondary, and I'm just worried about Jesus. And, I understand that thinking. But I do think also that we as Christians have an obligation to try to understand things from a scriptural point of view, from a scientific point of view. And I don't believe those two are in conflict with each other. I know you don't either. Brian, let's start with these discoveries that were made on the asteroids. You mentioned the serpentine that lend credence to this hydroplate theory. Talk about these discoveries and why that's relevant to this discussion.
Yeah, an asteroid Bennu, they found serpentine, and that basically, they imagined this watery planet that was going through space that exploded. And the serpentine, and they even show the map of the mid-oceanic ridge, which is a key component in the hydroplate, because that's where we say the water shot up from. And they said that it formed there, and they imagine a watery planet. And then there's a little clip. I was on Real Science Radio, and Doug Williams says, what you've just seen here is a victim of the government education system. They won't even consider that comet or that asteroid came from Earth. And there's been accurate predictions with the hydroplate theory. They predicted they'd find rounded boulders in comets and asteroids, and Comet 67P validated that. And then they also said that asteroids would be flying rock piles and loosely held together, and that's what they are. And NASA was wrong both times. And so, yeah, Kevin Lee is an expert on this, and we're going to be giving a hydroplate seminar on Standing for Truth on July 19th at 6 p.m. So if anybody wants more detail, that's on YouTube, Standing for Truth. But yeah, it's a theory that makes accurate predictions. NASA discoveries are validating it, and yet it's being kicked to the curb by evolutionists and creationists alike. And I'm trying to bring it into the mainstream so we can destroy the Big Bang once and for all.
Yeah, let's get into this, Brian. So the theory that we all learned was that over millions or billions, soon it'll be trillions of years, the continents slowly moved away from each other, and that's how the planet ended up looking like it does. My understanding, at least my very superficial understanding of this, is that the hydroplate theory holds that no, the Earth's crust is on water. And during this catastrophic great global flood that the Bible talks about, and that the scientific evidence, in my opinion, is just absolutely overwhelming, showing that this occurred, we had catastrophic movement and the pressure coming out. Walk us through the basics of this theory, and then people can go watch the videos if they want to get more in-depth.
Well, it's based on one assumption. That one assumption is half of the ocean was inside the Earth at one time. That's the only assumption. See, most theories, they try and figure out what caused something to happen, where this is setting up the cause with just the one assumption. And then if that was the case, and it's got biblical support, the fountains of the great deep broke up, and he laid the earth upon the waters. So there's biblical support for water being inside the earth at one time. And then you throw the moon in there, and that's going to stretch and compress the crust. See, right now, back then, the crust wasn't broken into plates like it is today. It was just the crust. And as it stretches and compresses every, twice a day with the tides and stuff, it's going to generate heat. That heat goes into the water. The water gets hotter and hotter and hotter. It wants to boil, but it can't, and because there's no room to expand. And then at 705 degrees and 3200 psi, it becomes supercritical water, where it's not really water and it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. So now it's starting to dissolve the granite above and the basalt below. And oh yeah, you might want to show that screenshot about the circle. Just think of the Earth as a big apple. The skin is 60 miles thick, made of granite, and then there's a layer of water underneath that, and then there's the basalt. Okay, and the granite and the basalt are touching at certain places. Okay, and when the water becomes supercritical, it dissolves the granite above and the basalt below, and it mixes together elements like limestone and salts and silicas and cementing agents. And then eventually, fast forward, the crust gets so weak that it splits in two directions at one time. That's what happened when the fountains of the Great Deep broke up. There's a crack in the crust. It goes in two directions all around the Earth, and then comes back together like a seam on the baseball. And then it rains for 40 days and 40 nights as the water gushes out of there. It's a fountain. And people say, well, if that would have happened, wouldn't it have left a mark on the Earth? And that it did. That's the mid-oceanic ridge. I don't know if you have that slide. In the middle of the ocean, it's the mid-oceanic ridge. That's a mountain range, 46,000 miles long. How does that form? By stretching in two directions. Okay, and so right now you got with the two cliffs 60 miles high, the water's shooting up with hypersonic speed, and it's eroding the granite above and on the sides and the basalt below, and that's where we get a lot of our sediment for sedimentary rock. And then eventually these cliffs get wider and wider and wider, and there's nothing to push down on the mantle, so the mantle bulges. Okay, and when it bulges, the continents start sliding, because the continents are on supercritical water, which is 50 times slicker than water. So it's just think of this big ice hockey or air hockey table. Now you can show the mountains one. The North America and South America are sliding to the east. Africa and Europe are sliding to the west, and then they buckle up when they meet resistance, and that's how we get the Rockies, and the Andes, which are pretty much parallel to the Mid-Atlantic ridge. Okay, and so now you got mountains, which are a big mass on a small base. They sink in, and then the plateaus, if something sinks in, something has to rise up, and that's the plateaus. That's another mystery for them. Okay, and then as that's how you get Grand Canyon. That's a whole nother talk, but you can see that on my YouTube channel. Okay, so the mountains sink in, the plateaus rise up, and similarly, as the mid-oceanic ridge rises up, something has to sink in, and that's the Pacific Ocean. So the Pacific Ocean sinks in, and that's why the trenches, that's why that ocean is so much different than all the other ones. It's got all this volcanic activity and table mounts and sea mounts and trenches. Mariana Trench is a mile deeper than Everest is high. Okay, so then the water which was covering the Earth gushes off the Earth to fill in the Pacific Ocean, and Walt Brown thinks that happened on the 150th day of the flood. That's the eruption. You had the eruption phase of the hydroplate, and then the continental drift phase of it, which he thinks was about 24 hours. And then he thinks the mountains rose up in about an hour. Okay, as they crushed like a car accident, just crushed up there. And then as it went up, it pushed the atmosphere, and then you had this big wind coming, like a tsunami of wind going across the Earth. Okay, and so then the water gushes off, cuts these canyons, which the submarine canyons are cut then. But the continental shelves are still sticking out, so it cuts the canyons, the continents sink down, and then the oceans rise up and bury those submarine canyons. And then we have the Ice Age, and evolutionists can't explain that, but we can. It takes a little bit of time, but we'll just fast forward. They found a mammoth standing up that was frozen in permafrost up in the Arctic Circle. How do you freeze a mammoth standing up? This is in a Russian museum, the Berezhnikov mammoth. And so what happened is some of this stuff was shooting up with such tremendous force, it got out of our atmosphere and got really cold in outer space. And then the gravity grabbed it and pulled it down, and so it buried them in muddy hail. How deep, I don't know. But that's how it froze the mammoths. And then fast forward a little bit, and some of this stuff was shooting up with such tremendous force that not only did it escape our atmosphere, it escaped our gravitational pull. So now you got this ice and dry ice and mud and stuff flying around. You got like 30 snowballs in the solar system. That'd be our comets. That's why our predictions about what they'd find in a comet were accurate, and their predictions were wrong. And then also the comets, the asteroids, and the trans-Neptune objects came from Earth. And that's what the orbits are showing. That's what they're finding inside the comets and asteroids are showing. And so this is a theory that's been very robust. And they say, well, if that happened, wouldn't it leave a mark on the moon? And it's like, yeah, the near side of the moon is pounded and the far side isn't. You have all these lava flows on the near side of the moon, and that's counterintuitive because the Earth protects the near side of the moon. So it's answering all these things, and even goes on to say how he thinks radioactivity formed during the flood, but that's a whole nother topic. I would just suggest people watch Brian Nickel videos on YouTube. And also, we've got some also, and Real Science Radio, rsr.org. When I listened to Walt Brown being interviewed, that colored in the details, and I've never seen the Earth the same or the solar system. So I'm just trying to get this into the discussion. Let's have people look at it. There should always be competing hypotheses so people can think. If they only have one that you're banging all the time, people just memorize. And that's what the evolutionists do with the plate tectonics. And that's what Christian organizations, the big ones, they only have the catastrophic plate tectonics, which is a secular model sped up. How does subduction begin? What's the mechanism? What's the force? These big plates move with those mountain roots so deep. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And then there's a book here called 20 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics, which is really good. And also the guy who mapped the seafloor, Tectonic Globaloni. This is from N. Christian Smoot. He was in the Navy. He was measuring he was mapping the ocean floor. And what he's saying, and a lot of it was top secret, he couldn't release it, but now he says, it doesn't work. Wow. And so I think that we should have multiple competing hypotheses. At those big museums, they should have plate tectonics, catastrophic plate tectonics, and the hydroplate. Show them all, let people think instead of just what they want people to think.
Yeah, no, and after watching some of those videos and looking at some of this evidence, I agree with you. This is something that at least needs to be considered. It's something that scientists need to look at and come up with some explanations for. Brian, this has really been a pleasure. The best way for people to watch these videos that you're talking about, that would be at the Solidify Your Faith YouTube channel, and then the ones that would be censored, those are at Revival of Truth on Rumble. Is there any other place people can go to get some of these?
Yeah, I would strongly suggest Real Science Radio, rsr.org. That's a radio program, comes out once a week. And also it's also on YouTube, and listen to the Walt Brown interviews. And you can go into rsr.org/HPT, and you can download this 600-page hydroplate book, 600-page, go into rsr.org/HPT. You see this cover, and then there's a 9th edition button underneath it, and you can click it and download it for free. And that's a good site. And then also there's so much on that website alone, like the objections to the theory and the answers to the theory. And so it's just a great source. And then Mike Snavely, he's got missionimperative.org. He's got a really good video on the Grand Staircase, how all these features around Grand Canyon came from the same event, like Zion and Bryce and the petrified trees. So anyhow, there's a lot to go into. Again, but Brian Nickel is very good at it. And then rsr.org is very good. Those are two good sources. And then I've got a hydroplate playlist just on my YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith. Excellent. And if you go there, you can see Walt Brown explain it himself. And so, yeah, that's a really good source. And I do appreciate you letting us get this information out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us today, Brian. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work. And I hope we can get you back soon to discuss this in more depth.
Amen. Thank you. Praise the Lord.
Amen. All right, folks, that is all we have time for today on the Sentinel Report. But I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to encourage you to get involved. Don't just be hearers of the word. We got to be doers. So we need to get out there and do things, not to save ourselves. We cannot save ourselves, but because God has called on us to be doers. There's so much that needs to be done. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So let's get busy. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Alex Newman. This is the Sentinel Report. Until next time, God bless you all.